It's Office Hours Live.
Woo!
Well, thank you. We're back again. It is, what's the day? The 20th? The 20th. Is it the 20th today? The 20th of September. I mean, next week, next Monday is going to be the big debate. And we're going to talk about that, and we have a lot to talk about. In fact, I want to take a little bit of our time talking about some things that are going on today or have just gone on that are not getting enough attention, I don't believe. But in the meantime, please alert others that we are live, because I'm live and you're live, and this is our opportunity to be alive and to actually, in probably the most disheartening, certainly the strangest election season ever in living memory, there's a lot to talk about. Anyway, let's begin to talk about it. Now, you may not know this right now. In fact, it just ended. Wells Fargo Bank. The CEO, John Strumpf. John Strumpf, you've heard of him, obviously. Here he is. Well, he's not all that happy because he actually just testified before Congress on Wells Fargo. You know, Wells Fargo had this compensation system where they were rewarding bank employees for setting up fake accounts, because basically the employees got bonuses, the number of accounts they set up, and Wells Fargo wasn't paying attention. So Wells Fargo was saying, in fact, the bank president, CEO, was saying on the phone to Wall Street analysts, "Isn't it wonderful, all the new business we're creating?" And those, you see, when a company creates incentives for employees that almost invariably will create problems for consumers or defraud consumers, who's responsible? Well, the company is responsible, and the head of this unit that did all of the defrauding, that actually where the employees were creating the false accounts, got $20 million in bonuses between 2010 and 2015 for all those fake accounts, and then just left the bank with a $125 million severance payment. I mean, really, when you think of that a kid who is found with a couple of ounces of cocaine goes to jail, who's going to jail? Nobody is going to jail. Nobody's even paying any penalty. And what ought to happen? And I really believe that maybe the senators will insist on this, but there's a provision in the law requiring that if you have gains and they are ill-gotten, if they are gotten illegally, there are clawback provisions in the law. Those gains have to be given back. So at the very least, the people in charge should give back their bonuses and their severance, and maybe even John Strumpf should think about. Last year he had $19 million he earned. It was earned. I mean, you'd say earned. That's partly because of all of the business, the fake business that was created in the bank with incentives that he should have known and everybody should have known were going to lead to all kinds of problems. So when you see this this testimony and this hearing covered in the press, understand what's really at stake here. It's called corporate responsibility, corporate governance, and whether anybody is responsible for anything. Okay? Good. Which brings us to the other thing. This is a tax amnesty. A lot of big corporations right now, it's not being reported. I know it because I know people on some of these committees on the Hill. These big corporations that have over $2 trillion abroad, mostly in tax havens where they're not being taxed on it, what they are trying to get from Congress is a special tax holiday, a kind of amnesty that allows them to bring back this money from abroad at a very low rate. Not the normal corporate tax rate, which is 35%, but a very, very low rate, much, much lower. In fact, even Donald Trump is talking about bringing back all of these foreign earnings at a 10% tax rate. Well, I'll tell you something. Nobody is talking about this, but this is very, very important. In 2004, there was a corporate tax amnesty to bring back what was then a lot of money abroad, not nearly as much as now, and $300 billion. Corporations brought $300 billion back to the United States to get that low. Then it was a 5.25% tax rate. Remember, the normal tax rate is 35% on corporate earnings, and Congress lowered it a special 5.25% just to get all of that money back. $300 billion came back. Now, the promise by corporations and corporate leaders were, you bring back the money and we're going to invest it in America, in new jobs, in research and development, and all kinds of fabulous things. You know what happened? Well, according to a new study of that 2004 particular amnesty, that money went into dividends for major stockholders. Obviously, the top 1% has about 40% of all of the shares of stock, or buyouts and buybacks of shares of stock to artificially raise the shares of stock prices, and also executive bonuses, what we were talking about just a moment ago. It did not go into new investment. It did not go into new jobs. It did not go into research and development. We know what happened in 2004, so don't forget that. When Congress begins to talk about a tax amnesty, just beware that what they're really talking about is more money for people who already have a great deal of money who just don't want to pay taxes. And that means, of course, that you and I and every other taxpayer has to pay more in order to make up the difference. All right? What I'm trying to do is just give you the background on stuff that's going on the Hill right now before I get to what I know all of you want to talk about, which is Donald Trump's tax plan. Right? I mean, you were waiting for that, right? You were thinking about it. Here is something else that's not being covered. Yesterday, the Tax Foundation, nonpartisan, it is very, very respected. The Tax Foundation looked at Donald Trump's tax plan, and of course we need to have Donald Trump right here with us. Hello, Donald. And there his hair, and that we have to get a little bit orange just so that we know who he is. Okay, so Donald Trump's tax plan. Donald Trump says he's a tribune of the working people, right? He's a populist representing working Americans. Baloney. Here's what the Tax Foundation found out about his tax plan. After they analyzed his tax plan, the top 1%, the richest 1% of Americans, because of Donald Trump, if he ever got his tax plan in, would get a tax break. That is a cut in what they already get of $122,400 per year. The top 1%, the richest 1% of Americans would actually get a tax break. That is, they'd have more than $122,000 per year than they have now. The middle class, how much of a tax break do they get? $500 a year. Okay? This is called trickle-down economics. And you know the interesting thing about trickle-down economics is basically nothing trickles down. Nothing ever trickles down. We did this, we saw in Ronald Reagan and in George W. Bush administrations. They lowered the tax rates on people at the top and nothing trickles down. And that's all Donald Trump is offering, this so-called populist, this so-called working class populist. All right, I've worked myself up into a lather, and now we're going to sit down and take your questions about this or anything else you want to talk about. A lot of things are happening and you need to know the facts. All right, first question is from Jonathan Coit. It seems like the failing of this whole election is largely thanks to mainstream news media. Do you agree that they play a huge role in the rise of Trump's American fascism? Jonathan, strong language, Trump's American fascism. Actually, it's language that I have used myself. Because he does represent neo-fascism, and I think that the media has fallen for him over and over and over again because he sells newspapers, and he sells media time, and he sells eyeballs because people are fascinated by him. Even though he is a first-class nincompoop, or worse, people just sort of like to watch him, and the media has fallen over themselves, making it possible for people to watch him. So yes, I think the media are absolutely involved, and they've been much harder on Hillary Clinton than they have on Donald Trump in terms of what they've questioned and what they've demanded. I mean, look at even the failure to file tax returns. Ronna Beitler, to disclose tax returns. Ronna Beitler, what two questions would you like to be asked to Trump and Clinton in the debate? One question, Ronna, and we're talking about the debate next Monday night. Don't forget to watch. One question for Donald Trump might be, what makes you think you're such a good businessman when, in fact, in 1976, you said publicly that your net worth was $200 million, and now we know your net worth is about $4.5 billion. But if you would put that $200 million into an index fund and simply reinvested the proceeds you got since 1976, you'd have not $4.5 billion right now, you'd have $12 billion. So you are not a good businessman, Donald Trump, you are a negative businessman. You actually lose money. It's an extraordinary achievement, Donald Trump. How did you do that? With Hillary Clinton, I would ask her, why is it that people distrust you? What is it? What is it exactly? Is it the vast right-wing conspiracy? Or is there anything you are doing that might invite their distrust? And what would you do differently? And what will you do differently? And how can you be more transparent? Next question. Cynthia Crowder, do you think next Monday's Clinton-Trump debate will exceed all records for viewing? Cynthia, I don't think it's going to exceed, sporting events, NFL, etc. But I do think it will. Do you remember the final episode of MASH? Do you remember that? Anybody? Nobody remembers it? Nobody here. There are at least 500 people here in my office, and none of them remembers the final episode of MASH. Well, the final episode of MASH drew about 100 million viewers. That was the highest for a non-sports event. And I think that the debate next Monday, my prediction, you heard it here first, is going to draw over 100 million viewers. I think it's going to be extraordinarily important in terms of the outcome of this election. Carolyn Seymour, what should Hillary Clinton do in the debates? Another debate question. Carolyn, I think that she should make Donald Trump look like, as absolutely innocent of facts as he is. I think she should just ask him simple questions like, Donald Trump, what do you think about the Earned Income Tax Credit? Should it be expanded? Donald Trump, what do you think about the investor-state dispute mechanism in the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Just stuff that a presidential candidate ought to know, and he will stammer. He will not know what he's talking about. And then she can follow up very gently and with a great deal of equanimity and dignity. She could just say, do you have any idea what you're talking about? Showing up his ignorance is very important. And I think also showing him for the bigoted entity, the bigoted nativist that he is. And that's going to be very easy. She could just quote back a few things that he said. Julie Griffin, if I talk to a Trump supporter who thinks trickle-down economics works, what's the best way to refute that position? Well, Julie, you can simply say, as I tried to suggest a moment ago, that Ronald Reagan's trickle-down economics and George W. Bush's trickle-down economics, both of them reduced taxes on the wealthy with a promise that it was going to help everybody, and actually since they did that, in fact, you can go back and see when the median wage stagnated for most Americans. It goes back to the Reagan administration. That's when, today people are not much wealthier if you are middle class than you were then. Even though the economy is twice as large, almost all the benefits have gone to the top. Trickle-down economics not only doesn't trickle down, but also generates huge deficits. We saw that at the end of the Reagan first Bush administration, gigantic budget deficit, and then I was part of the Bill Clinton administration. We worked very hard. We tried to overcome that deficit. We actually balanced the budget, and then what happened? George W. Bush came in, and we had a $5 trillion deficit after Bush because of his tax cuts. So that's what happens. Trickle-down economics is a cruel hoax. It's cruel because nothing trickles down. It's a hoax because you get these huge deficits that mean essentially that you've got to cut services for a lot of people that desperately need them. Mark Herbst. Did I pronounce it correctly, Mark? Herbst? Are the actions of the Federal Reserve contributing to income inequality? Mark, good question. There are two completely contradictory views on this. I will tell you where I stand, but some people say, because interest rates are so low, it's very possible for big corporations and very wealthy people to borrow like crazy and put their borrowing into investments, and those investments are generating yields that they would never ever be able to get if they were not so dependent on debts. And that kind of debt financing is dangerous for everybody, even though it's rewarding very wealthy people right now. I think that is a consideration, Mark, but my view is right now, you don't want to do anything that slows the economy down, because the first people who lose out when the economy slows, the first people who are fired are the poor. The next people who are fired when the economy slows are lower middle class people. So if you raise interest rates, it's going to hurt the economy. I wouldn't do it. Matt Sanders. Robert, do you think news outlets purposely make the race seem closer than it is in order to keep ratings high? Matt, there is some reason to believe that sometimes some news outlets do that, but what we're seeing really across the gamut of particular polls, the Real Clear Politics has an average of all the polls. It's showing that the race is closing. That the gap is closing, and we don't know any individual poll. Just don't pay attention to any individual poll. We don't know how they're polling. Some polls don't even call people with regard to their phones, their internet services. Some do basically snail mail phoning, which is ridiculous. But just look at the averages of all the polls and you see the trend. The trend itself is of concern. Jim Glassman, are you really worried Trump could win the presidency? Jim, I am worried. Because I'll tell you why I'm worried. Because never underestimate the power of a demagogue spouting hatefulness and lies. Historically, they always do better than anybody thinks they're going to do, because for one thing, a lot of people are reluctant to admit that they are attracted to a demagogue, and they actually, when they are in the privacy of a voting booth, they sometimes do fall for those lies. And secondly, when you have somebody preying on vulnerabilities and fears, at a time when people, even though the economy is doing better, a lot of Americans, a lot of people are still not doing well, and they are fearful. And it's much easier to blame a scapegoat like immigrants or Muslims or any minority group in the United States than it is to actually understand the system as a system. And so that's why I am concerned about Trump. And meanwhile, Hillary Clinton, let's face it, she is not really a great politician. She is not doing terribly well as a politician in terms of connecting with people. Next question. Kathy Barslow, what do you think Hillary will do to draw the millennial voters? It appears she's not swaying them. Kathy, I think you're referring to the fact that all the information we have, is that in a four-way race, in fact, this is a Quinnipiac poll that came out yesterday, Hillary Clinton in a four-way race. This includes the Libertarian candidate and also Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate. Hillary Clinton gets about 31% of people under the age of 34. Only 31%. That's not good. 60% of millennials and people under the age of 34 supported Barack Obama. So she has got to generate enthusiasm among young people. Now, young people notoriously don't vote in very, very great numbers, but they are critically important, particularly for the Democrat, whoever the Democrat is in a race. So Hillary, in the last 7 weeks, really has got to focus very, very big time on young people. Next, Kelly Smith. What's your favorite candy? Kelly, we're talking about big issues here. My favorite candy, well, I'll tell you, I like dark chocolate. All right, Ian Duncan, is it Duncan or Dunker? Duncan. Yeah. Is there still a middle class? Ian, if you define the middle class as people who are earning, and this is a definition that is completely arbitrary, but many people use it, family income between $40,000 and $80,000 a year, then the middle class is shrinking. I mean, that's a fair definition of the middle class, but you've got more and more people who are below that, and you've got more people who are way above that. I mean, way, way, way above that. And you've got fewer and fewer people who are in that great bulge, at least it used to be a great bulge, called the middle class. That is a problem. It's a problem for the economy because you need a growing, not a shrinking, a growing middle class in order to have the purchasing power we need to keep the economy going. And also in order to allow there to be enough places in the middle class for poor people to move into as they move upward. Stephen Coquet, or Coquette. I don't know, Stephen. I don't know how to pronounce it. Can there be economic progress in a declining population? If this is theoretically possible, has it ever happened? Stephen, it rarely happens because, well, it depends on what you mean by economic progress. Economic growth is very hard because part of economic growth is population growth. But can you have economic progress in terms of quality of life improvement in a declining population? Yes, you can. And over the last 300 years, for example, there are civilizations and societies with declining populations that have done very well. I mean, look at Scandinavia, even right now. Many Scandinavian countries have populations that are barely growing. Some are showing actually, statistically, some signs of shrinking. But Scandinavian standards of living, quality of life, arguably, according to many measures, are better than they are in the United States. Barry Michelson. Trump used $258,000 from his charity to settle legal problems. That actually just came out this morning. Barry, you are on top of the news. Doesn't this violate federal law? Yes, it violates federal law because a charitable contribution is tax deductible. And so you can't possibly use charitable contributions that are tax deductible to pay off legal problems. Now, the next obvious question is, why aren't the authorities going after Trump? I don't know. Why haven't the authorities gone after him on soliciting foreign nationals for his campaign, which is also illegal? A lot of members of parliament in Britain and in Australia and even Iceland have complained that they've got solicitations from Trump for his campaign. That is absolutely a violation of federal law. Why is no one going after Trump? I don't know. Good question. But we ought to be asking it more and more. Bart McCutcheon, should the government approve the proposed acquisition of Monsanto by Bayer? No. That creates more and more market power. Monsanto already has huge market power. This is a fertilizer chemical giant. It's going to be even a bigger fertilizer chemical giant. A lot of farmers already, particularly small farmers, are paying through the nose for Monsanto seeds and fertilizer. This is going to make everything worse. The antitrust authorities in the United States need to crack down on these mergers, because we're seeing more and more gigantic consolidation in more and more industries, and it is driving up prices and hurting all of us. Azerbaijan, Barik, did I get that right? It sounded pretty good, didn't it, as a pronunciation? Azerbaijan, Barik. In my country, Norway, you see? I speak a little, I don't speak any Norwegian. The state owns almost all the hydropower. Some right-wing politicians want to sell to private companies all this hydropower. Do you think a country should keep owning its hydropower? Azerbaijan, I think Norway needs to keep owning its hydropower. You know, privatization, I understand the moves for privatization, and if you actually have a market in something where there's competition, yes, you could privatize. But where there's no real competition, if one company is going to take over Norway's hydropower, where's the competition? Is it going to be international competition? That's not, you know, hydropower is basically country by country. That is not internationally competitive. And if Norway sells out to a giant corporation, that is going to mean much higher prices for Norwegians. Now, I don't normally give advice to Norway. I mean, in a typical day. Aaron Godblot. Complaining doesn't seem to be getting us anywhere. Are smart people finally going to have to go French or Russian Revolution with large caliber arms to break America's oligarchy? Aaron, no. Come on. You know, the one thing about the United States is that every time historically that we've gone capitalism, our system has gone off the rails. And I'm talking about a number of historical times in the 1830s, in the 1890s with the Gilded Age, in the 1930s with the Great Depression, even the 1960s in terms of a lot of women and minorities, understandably and with great justification, feeling as second-class citizens. You know what we did? We don't go into fascism or take up arms or do anything like that. We reform ourselves. We are resilient. We are practical. We put aside ideology and get on with what has to be done. We will do this again, Aaron. The trouble with taking up arms, I mean, we did it once, I know, 1776 or before that. I get it. I get it. And in those instances, or in that instance, rather, there was some justification. But since then, we do have a democracy. The issue is getting big money out of our democracy. That's the first step. Aaron, do you get me? Okay, we've got two more questions, and these better be good ones. These better be good ones, because the whole week, we're not going to, you know, and there are only 7 weeks left. 7 weeks today. From today is election day. Matt Moore, can you please talk about the feasibility of universal basic income? Matt, it's so interesting you ask, because we are preparing a video on that very subject. But let me just say that I predict, this is one of my predictions, that it'll be impossible to disprove, because by the time it happens, nobody will remember. Or by the time it doesn't happen, nobody will remember. But my prediction is that as technology continues to take away more and more and more jobs, and I'm not talking about displacing workers into other kind of jobs. I'm talking about actually getting rid of jobs, which should be great. I mean, that's, you know, what John Maynard Keynes, writing in 1928, published in 1930, the economic possibilities of our children, grandchildren, predicted that in 100 years we would have all this leisure, this wonderful, he said leisure. I said leisure. Keynes said leisure. All this wonderful opportunities for leisure. But what he didn't take account of is that if our jobs are taken away, we won't have any money. So we need the money to have the leisure. And so a guaranteed, universal guaranteed basic income will be of a necessity. And people will be understanding it. And look for our video coming within the next, 2 weeks? Something like that. Amanda West. Were you an early and or talented drawer as a child? Can we see some of your childhood drawings? Oh, Amanda, what a nice thing to ask. No, is the answer. But you know what I'll do? I'll just keep drawing. You know, in our videos, I've always loved to draw, and to call it drawing actually is a little bit egoistical. It's just cartooning. But listen, it's been a pleasure. There's a lot going on. We just really just scratched the surface. Come, please join us next week. And let me, again, I want to thank our wonderful people here. Zoe Umlaut Beck, who's right behind this little iPhone. And Yael Bridge, who's not here today, but Yael is working very, very hard. Joban Gill, Joban, thank you for helping today. And we will be back next week, 6 weeks to go next week with regard to the election. Please work hard. And by the way, be optimistic. You know, I know that it looks pretty awful. It's a disheartening election. It's one of the most disheartening elections I remember. But we will do fine. We will do fine. This country will, we have extraordinary reserves of decency and also energy. See you next week.